Hey there, welcome back to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and today I am thrilled to welcome back my friend Mark Mohammadpour. He's the founder of Chasing the Sun. Mark's been on the show probably 4 or 5 times now, and each time he always brings fresh insights on culture, communication, and well-being. In today's chat, Mark breaks down what a true culture of well-being really means beyond the buzzwords, to help teams create a healthier, more connected work environment. He shares how communication is at the heart of defining culture and well-being, and he introduces his innovative CHASE model, which is a step-by-step way to tackle real challenges like burnout and time off usage. If you're looking for actionable ideas to boost team morale and drive genuine change in your workplace, this episode is packed with practical strategies you won't want to miss. As always, this show is brought to you courtesy of Xenium HR. If you're an HR professional or business leader who could use some guidance and support on your HR and leadership development programs, check out Xenium's custom HR and learning and development programs. And if you like what you heard today, hit that subscribe button and share this episode with somebody who could use a little inspiration to transform their work life. All right, let's dive into the show with Mark Mohammadpour. Mark, it is such a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. I don't even know how many times you've come on. What is this, 4?
I want to say 4 or 5. Yeah,
it's
always an honor to chat with you. And I know we could chat all day, but love being able to do so over the last few years.
I love that we made it a habit of checking in about every year, and your content's evolving. You're doing so much keynote speaking, and it's been fun to watch you grow. So here's a quick little check-in for today, for the new year. You've been talking a lot about a culture of well-being, and I want you to define that for me, because I've heard a lot of people say that word, like culture of well-being. Like, what does that mean in terms of putting it to practice?
So here's the good news, Brandon, is that there's so many people who are talking about it, and so many people are passionate about the topic and have their own approaches to it. I think these two words are too vague, and I'm trying to make the case the role of communication in defining culture and defining well-being is key. And that's what my role with Chasing the Sun is to help empower people to shine. And I consider myself at the nexus between communications, culture, and well-being. But how do we talk about culture and well-being? So let's start with culture. If I leave your audience with anything today, is that I don't think enterprise-wide culture exists. Culture really is defined between the employee and the employer, and it's about the people you're spending your time with. If you're working in a company with hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people, you don't know all those people. You're going to be working with the people that you are spending your time, 90% of your time with. This could be a group of 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 people. That's how you define your relationship with your company. It's much like you and I live in the Portland, Oregon metro area. So there's 700,000 people in the metro area. But if you asked every person how they think about the city, you're going to get 700,000 different responses. You might receive some themes, but you're getting a lot of different answers. It's much like our relationship with our company. So teams need to think about what culture means and what that environment looks like. So that's one part of it. Then we got to think about well-being. For so many years, Brandon, we've talked about wellness, and we've talked about it in terms of primarily physical health. When I started my career, I would get $50 a month gym stipends. That was sort of my wellness benefit. Over the last few years, it's evolved to mental health, which really from a point solution are meditation apps, things like that. We have sort of thought about wellness in that way. From an HR benefit standpoint, it's a point solution. We're going to bring in a meditation app. We're going to bring in a physical health app. We're going to bring in perhaps a financial app to help our employees. For me, it's really around mindset, around what is the health of our employees and how we're measuring that through what I follow as the U.S. Surgeon General's approach, which really looks at not only physical health, not only mental health, financial health, social health, community, and career. And it's ultimately waking up and saying, is my life better because I work here? And I love the point solutions. I love the meditation apps and all those things, but Are your employees staying at your company because they're offering that? No, they're staying because they sleep better at night, they make more money, they feel more confident, their career is taken care of, they're seen as value and they can grow. Those are things that are really defined within well-being. And so creating a culture of well-being means that your team, as leaders, as you're thinking about the well-being of the people that you're working with, how are you tailoring and taking all the great information you're getting from HR as far as the benefits and the rules and approaches, and how are you applying that to your work stream? And that's everything from how do we take time off as a work stream, because every work stream is going to need to think about taking time off a little bit differently, times of year, length, things like that. What are our core working hours? When do we need to be in the office and why? A lot of discussion, Brandon, around return to office. We need to make sure that we're communicating clearly why we're coming to the office and what we're doing differently than being at home. Our communication channels, when we have this infinite number of ways in which we can communicate, and how we prioritize things. How do we understand what our role is and what do we do day in and day out? If we're able to solve those challenges and answer those questions at a team level, that is a healthy team. That is a healthy culture of well-being that is going to help keep your employees and help make your company more money ultimately. So that's how that's defined.
That statement you made about my life is better because I work here, very aspirational. Have you actually heard employees say that? And if you've got to go a little deeper with them, those that do say it, what are the reasons they give for why their life is better for working in an organization?
Well, it's a great question. I was just chatting with somebody the other day about how we could solve this in part in the next 5 years. And I said, and I'll tell you, it's literally an act of Congress around childcare. If we can help companies and empower companies to be able to help take care of parents, expectant parents, they will stay. That is one reason why I hear my life is better because I work here, because I know that my company is going to take care of childcare benefits. They're going to support longer leave, not only for the mother, but also the father. Might seem kind of out of the blue. Why do we talk about childcare? Well, this is a huge stressor for people. So that is one example why I hear I want to stay at my company, because I know that if I want to grow a family, I can do it here. Another area of career well-being, and this is something that I have started to lead workshops and offsites with teams about, with leaders who say, Mark, I really want to empower my team to grow. I'm worried that they're going to be stagnant. I'm worried that if I leave, that the replacement is not going to be put in a position for them to grow. Can you help lead discussions? And so that is incredibly powerful to be able to talk about, where is your job going? What do you actually do? Where do you want it to go? And then how does the company, through its own benefits, to be able to support that? And the output is really creating a professional development plan that is not only important for the individual, but also learning from one another. This is one of the fun exercises I love doing, is be able to create an exercise in which the entire team learns from one another, whether they're professional skills or personal skills. There's a sense of connection. It's beyond that cheesy icebreaker, and it's actually practical for people to be able to execute. That's what keeps people staying. They want to feel connected. They want to feel like they can grow. And again, it's around creating a healthy environment for people. Now, those are just a few examples.
Do you think there's a perception gap between employers and employees? Because I often think, like, are they keeping their pulse close enough on what employees want and what drives them, and why they might say something like, my life is better because I work here? Is there a gap between those? And that's a very general question, because I'm sure some organizations are great and some are not, but what's your overall?
There's some data from Gartner, for instance, that talks about there is an awareness gap in benefits, and certain benefits, whether it be financial or others, between what the company offers and what employees actually use. And I think there's some deeper discussions that needs to happen as to really why. My hypothesis is that it comes down to communication. And we need to make sure that we're partnering with HR to make sure that we're creating an internal communication strategy that's a multi-pronged approach, right? So I'm chatting with an HR audience. You do such an incredible job in working with benefits brokers and be able to provide what you need, and you're surveying your employees. I want to be able to help represent the communications world who can partner with you on a strategic approach to communicating those benefits, so that you have your online portal, you have the PDFs, You have the Ask Me Anything sessions. But at that team level, back to the team, back to the manager, back to the executives, how can they duplicate that message? We need to have concise messages. We have to have clear messages. They also have to be consistent. When you think about making a purchasing decision, Brandon, on anything, it can take 6, 7, 8 different touch points for that to trigger to be able to say, okay, I want to make that decision. And so we need to think about this in terms of benefits and make sure that we are putting together a communication strategy that's multi-pronged and we're being strategic throughout the year. We're also highlighting great examples of employees using those benefits for good. Back to what I was talking about a couple minutes ago about childcare. Being able to put our journalism hat on. And again, I come from the public relations and communications world, right? So it's a lot about sleuthing and finding out information from employees who are willing to share how their company made their life better and be able to work with HR in a way to be able to communicate that not only internally, but also working with marketing, external communications to communicate that externally through the website, through the job description, having the recruiter having a few topics on hand so that they can talk about, oh, you're expecting parent. Okay, did you know, by the way, blah, blah, blah. Those are the things that I would love to see more often. And I think it's going to be incredibly powerful in the years to come.
Hey, you're talking, there's a lot of HR people listening to this podcast. And I often think, especially when we had that conversation about wellness, I think it was all wellness programs. And I'm sure as we're trying to make that shift to well-being, they're met with resistance internally, whether it's executives or, we don't have the time and energy and budget. We've got to focus on what's in front of us. Like what's the argument to be made about HR really pushing the initiatives towards that well-being conversation we're talking about?
So I think we have to think about it in terms of the perspective of the executives. One of my core keynotes is around leading with empathy. And depending on who you talk to, empathy can be kind of a difficult word. Some people that resonates very well with. Some people think it's kind of this new age sort of topic. Really, it just comes down to perspective. It's being able to say, I understand, Brandon, what is influencing you, what's keeping you up at night, what excites you, where you want to go. And the more that we understand our executives and what's important to them, the better. Oftentimes, it's going to come down to dollars and cents. It's going to come down to business objectives. It's going to come down to quarterly sales, end of year, trying to land a new client, trying to launch something, trying to increase the thought leadership of a particular executive so that they're seen more. These are the things that executives think about. And the more that our HR community understands that and asks the questions in prime and pump and understand really what influences them will ultimately help how to have that discussion about well-being, how to talk about the impact of leadership training, about human skills training, around those types of things and the impact that it can have on retention, which saves money, right? And then there's figures from SHRM that says it can cost up to twice as somebody's salary to replace them. And that's a significant cost. And that's not just productivity and soft costs. It's being able to pay for a recruiter. It's onboarding. It's potential loss of clients because of relationships from the previous employee. And there's obviously the reputational benefits as well. But it does come down to understanding the perspective of the executives, what's important to them, the perspectives of the board of directors as well, and what they're thinking about. And I realize this is not an overnight sort of solution. This takes work, but when done right and you're building relationships with them and seeing it through their lens, it's incredibly powerful because every communication you send, every presentation, every proposal is really thought through that lens first and foremost because that's what they're thinking about as well.
In your opinion, like who's driving this conversation on well-being? People are talking about it, and I hear it a lot more than I ever have. Is it employees driving it? Is it HR people? Or are there some really progressive executives that are starting this conversation?
Well, I think you need executives, you need leaders who are vulnerable enough to know that they themselves cannot drive culture. That culture cannot just be top down. So you need folks who really trust their executive bench. You need executives who are aware of the business objectives and they need to understand the impact of the people, not only in the short term for meeting those objectives, but really about the relationship between them and the executive, because our relationship with work is evolving, right? We're not working at the same company for 40 years anymore. Though our former bosses could be our future clients, our bosses could, hire us and vice versa. And so those relationships change. I think a lot of this does come down to back to my talk about the culture of well-being and thinking about the team level. I really want those middle managers. I want those director levels who are looking to grow, who are managing people, who are thinking about retention, who are thinking about boundaries, who are thinking about how do I be proactive here and level up. And I think a lot of this has to come down to I need to take care of my people and think about that first and think through that lens. And everything else will fall into place. Once you understand how to set boundaries through the lens of what's important to the executives, because all that brand is going to do is help you prioritize what's important and be able to help set boundaries because, middle managers, directors, they get information from so many different places and it can be overwhelming, especially if you haven't received manager training, you're starting to manage people. It's a lot. And so that's my call to action for managers and directors to really learn how to set boundaries, how to really help empower your team and get out of the way, and then also learn what's important from your executives. And that is a recipe for success. So it's not just top down, it's not just bottom up. It has to be at every sector within the organization.
The HR people I know, they love models to follow, some proven process. And you, in your talk about the Chase model. And this identifies like challenges and heroes along the way. Walk us through this model. If there's an example you can apply it to, even better, but I'm putting you on the spot. So share what that model is.
Well, I love it. As a PR communications person and, working with business leaders, we need those quantifiable objectives, but we need to figure out what is it that we want to change within an organization. I think this is one of the potentially overwhelming things about impacting culture and well-being is that a lot of folks just want to change everything. And where I'm trying to go is we need to start with a pilot. And when I think about the work stream, what is an example of a challenge within a work stream? One of that could be around pay time off. We talked about this before, Brandon, but Americans are terrible at taking time off. What if there was a work stream within your organization where you had middle managers who on average were leaving a couple weeks of paid time off on the table, and you were also noticing that there was some burnout and some turnover? That is a perfect example of putting together a pilot program through the Chase model in which we would be able to help solve that problem. So Chase, CHASE, the C stands for challenge, right? So the challenge is that we want to get all of our middle managers using all their paid time off next year, and with the impact to reduce people leaving by X%. The hero is the middle manager. What do we know about them? They're overwhelmed. They've received very little manager training. No one has spoken to them about how to proactively create a paid time off schedule, things like that. The action, that's actually what we're going to do. That could be a multi-pronged approach with HR and executives to be able to talk about what are the policies and how do we help implement that. Then the solution is really about the communication of that. And so that's the communication strategy with HR, with your executives, and within your own team about how do we operationalize taking time off. And I host separate discussions on how to prepare proactively for taking time off. How do you schedule the time? What do you do a week to 2 weeks before? What does your team do while you're out? What happens the day or two when you come back so you don't have those Sunday scaries? All of those things to ultimately make people feel that it's okay to take time off. Everybody talks about saying, you take your time off and do that. But then you have the other side of the coin is you hear people say, I go on vacation and then I have to do twice as much work. We don't want that. And we can mitigate that by putting in tools in place to do that. So that would be part of the solution, is part of the communicating and the executing. And then the E is for the evaluation. How do we ultimately measure success? And that's obviously working with HR and seeing the data and seeing how that impacts the results. So that's a Chase model in one specific instance around taking time off. And there could be other different examples. For instance, if you have a group of executives who requested to take therapy and the company's offered it, but only a small percentage of executives have actually taken it, and go through that model and understand why. So that's the Chase model, but it's very scenario driven and very work stream driven. And once you learn what works well and what doesn't, then you can expand it throughout the rest of the organization.
I love that model because like one of the things I think about a lot is, especially over the years as we've talked about wellness, is, we have a formal wellness program. Well, how do we measure the success of it? Well, what the Chase model does is it flips it on its head and actually looks at the challenge first. So the challenge, and then you walk through each scenario and then you evaluate, and that's your metric at the end of the day, is like those individual metrics all rolled up into one. Is like, what challenges are we solving now? And you can measure them individually versus this wellness program that is so, you want it to be metric driven, but it's just so fluffy, and most people aren't good at measuring the success of it and often wasting money and time.
I love wellness committees. I have nothing against them. I think there's an opportunity to sort of elevate that group, because a lot of it comes down to healthy snacks and walking challenges and things like that. And
I like those things. They're fine.
It's fun. But I do think there's an opportunity to elevate that role and talk about what's the challenge we're actually trying to solve. Yes, that is fun, but there's an opportunity here to take data, which we know every company has, as far as what's been used and what people want. And again, this comes back to the employee survey as well. And that we haven't even gone down that route, but understanding what people want and need and be able to come back to them and say, we've listened to you. That's a part of this model as well, and part of that approach, and as part of the research phase.
Where I want to go next is, since you brought up the survey, I'm curious if you put a lot of thought into how do organizations create a culture of well-being when there's a diverse set of needs, diverse people, different backgrounds, different cultures, different desires, different stages of life, certainly different financial needs, different well-being needs. How do you tailor well-being programs, or even the Chase model? How do you make sure that nobody's left behind and that you are tailoring it to the diverse group that you have?
It's a great question. And I think the reality is that not every company can meet the needs of every employee every time.
So it's challenging about it.
It is challenging, but that's a reality. And I think this is part where communication comes into it, and just being very transparent and be able to say, this is what we're offering at this time. We want to take the information and be able to, come back. But again, back to the childcare part of it, the data showing how expensive it is for parents to raise kids, like that can help a significant number of people, kind of independent of, any other factor. But really, to answer your question, Brandon, I think it comes down to a couple things related to surveys. One is we have to sort of evolve the idea that we don't want to survey our employees too much. The reality is, Brandon, is that employees will respond to surveys every day if the executives take the feedback and be able to apply it. It's when they don't that employees don't want to take the surveys because they see nothing's going to happen with it. Companies who are afraid, we just surveyed our people. Well, you're really afraid because you haven't acted on it. So do something with the intention to act on it. And you need, before you implement it, you need to talk about what's the timeline for people to review, what's the action, then how you're going to communicate it back to the staff. And back to the culture of well-being, it's that you might have the executives and the HR communicate it, but then at the team level, what does this mean for our team? What is the changes that we're going to make as a result, right? So I think that's one part of it. But the other part of the survey, and this is obviously where the planning comes in, is, and a lot of companies do this already, but it is being able to identify by work stream how they're feeling and what are the benefits they want and need. And it's that next level that we need to be able to identify. One group has a particular issue here and another group has another issue here. We apply the model, but to solve different challenges within different work streams. And again, this is extra work, but this is how we need to create an adaptive approach to well-being in an environment where you're going to have one work stream that's a little bit, has different challenges than another.
I hope I'm not going to go too off the rails with this next question, but I think about it a lot. I use a ton of technology, including generative AI, and it makes my job a lot better. And is this a geeky of me to say it makes me happier at work? And I think it impacts my well-being. I'm able to get more done with less. It's fun. And I couldn't imagine not having some of these tools, let alone I couldn't imagine working inside of an organization that didn't offer some of these tools to me. And I think that would impact my happiness and probably cause me to look elsewhere. Are you seeing that too with AI tools and some other technology advancements, employers not adapting to these things fast enough and giving employees the tools that they want to do their job effectively? It's actually impacting them negatively?
there's two challenges. So I agree with you that if done right, AI can make you happy because it can solve some of the challenges. But I think AI has a PR problem, and I think PR communications has an AI problem. So I realize this is an HR audience, but there's some connective tissue here. So I think the challenge with generative AI and having a PR problem is we need to get very scenario based in how we're using it to better our life. So we need more people like you, Brandon, to talk about what are the 5 ways you've used generative AI to improve your life. It saved your time by doing this. It's helped you more confident by doing Y. But most importantly, it hasn't negatively impacted your job to a degree that you're replaceable, right? So that's the first part. And then from the PR comms, and I'll loop HR into this because we're all services, we need to understand how AI can not replace our jobs, but be able to evolve our relationship with our career. This is one of the challenges that we see, especially with people who are new to their career, perhaps they're coming out of college. When you start your job, especially in a services model, you're not necessarily client focused. You might be more behind the scenes, maybe doing research, all types of things that we are seeing being replaced by AI. What I would love to see is making sure that in college, when we're out of college, that we are now focusing more on critical thinking, going deeper, looking at the perspective of the executives, understanding business impact, those types of things that will help grow our relationship, because we're all in the relationship business. AI is a tool that can help solve challenges, but we need to evolve our role as consultants, as trusted advisors. And yes, we're going to have tools that we use to be able to do that. But that's where mentally as services group need to think about how we're going to embrace these tools going forward. I realize this is not going to be an overnight thing, but this is the mindset that we need to shift. But we need to hear from people like you and me and others to talk about how they've used AI in a very positive way to be able to help their life. And the more that we get those scenarios and the more that we learn from one another and be open and transparent and be okay with it, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, that's well said. Maybe I'll do a podcast on just use cases for AI, because I think, I mean, the way I think about it too is like getting rid of those repeatable processes that are just like, I mean, if a machine can do it, let's just have it do it so I can focus on the relationship building. And yeah, I've had conversations with a lot of people in the tech world. I have a podcast dropping, I think it'll come before this, with James Lawrence, who built an AI tool, a coaching tool that is founded on the DISC model that will basically give you tips on how to basically go into a meeting with somebody. Like, Mark is this, and you should tailor your conversation around this, or he likes to talk about this, and if he does this, you might consider doing this. And so it's all about creating the human relationship. And I think if we can think about AI and other tools that way, we're going to be better for it, especially, those of us in the service industry who it's all about people.
I think that's a perfect example, right? So you have the baseline, and then maybe there's somebody else you connect with and be able to say, can you give me a little bit more color about this person? And it helps kind of round out the understanding of those person or those people that you're meeting with, right? So you have sort of the baseline personality characteristics that are good to have, but what you really, really also need is that color on top of that. And that's a little bit more difficult to replace. And I think, the back channeling, kind of the traditional stuff that you do, the research to be able to help supplement that will only round it out. And that's a perfect example of how do we improve our relationships with people, and how do we sort of use AI to be able to help kick us off.
A couple more things and I'll let you go. I've been noticing this a lot lately. There's a lot of consolidation happening within organizations, mergers, acquisitions. I've even seen like those who are small businesses who would normally probably sell their business or have their kids take it over. The kids are not wanting the business, and so there's no succession plan. So they sell either to private equity, another organization that does what they do and then just absorb them, or another buyer. And that clash of cultures comes into play, right? I wonder, those people who are in that organization getting absorbed or merged together, what that does to their well-being. I've never been a part of that. I'm sure you've talked to people that have been, but what advice do you have for those either experiencing that or part of the leadership team experiencing that, or those that are making the decision to sell or acquire, and just what that means for your people?
So as much as we love to focus on the short term, I'm about the relationship and about the long term, and thinking about the relationship between the teams that you're working with and the people that you're working with are more important than the short term. And I realize that building relationships long term does not positively impact short term dollars and cents. And I understand that, but we're in an evolution, Brandon, in how we work. And again, we're not working at the same company for 40 years. It's 2 years here, a year there, 3 years here. We've kind of come over the stigma when you look at a CV or resume and you see people hopping around. That used to be a red flag. Now it's not so much, right? What this means as an employee, and if you are hearing rumors and speculation about acquisition, whatever, and I've been a part of this in my career, it's scary. What I would recommend is to attack, is to
Like some offense on the communication side.
Well, on the communication side, and then also attack from the idea of, I need to build my network outside of the organization. I would have a mindset of assuming that my role is not going to stay. And I don't mean to say that as a scary thing, but I do mean that as a way to stabilize your well-being and be able to say, look, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to find my next role. And if that happens, great. If not, and I'm staying, the worst thing that's happened is I've built a network and had some conversations with some other employees, with some other employers. So that's what I do. And that's a little scary, especially if you've been in your company a long time. You love your company, you love your people, but this is the mindset that I want people to get. And you can call it an always on approach to all this. I don't necessarily want people to constantly be looking for their next job, but when there are rumors and speculation, that could happen. Now, you might not have a job impact for 3 months or 6 months or a year, but you'd rather have that conversation now with prospective companies versus getting really surprised at some point when they bring you in and impacts happen. Now, I'm not saying that happens all the time, but again, this is a mindset shift that needs to occur. Now, that's on the employee side. On the employer side, on the executive side, this is, again, where empathy is really important. And understanding that your employees are nervous, they're scared, and the more that you can be a resource to them, the better. I realize there's some things that you can't tell them. Things are still getting signed, and implications and decisions are being made. But I think this is, again, about the tenure and the relationship between the employee and the employer, and what that means long term. Because how that relationship, that chapter, that relationship ends is going to impact the rest of that book. And I've seen in my life where I worked with people 15 years ago who have come back and said, hey, Mark, I love what you're doing. Our team needs help. And that happens time and time again. I'm sure it happens to you, happens to a lot of your listeners. And so we are entering this phase of kind of ambiguity and unknown around the companies and what's going to happen. And if I were an executive and thinking about this long term, I would definitely have as much empathy for your teams as possible.
This is a great conversation, Mark. I think it's tip of the iceberg. I think it's motivating for a lot of employers to hear this and to put effort towards well-being. And definitely if they're in the wellness stage and we got to move to well-being, what's one thing you want to leave people with today? As we have talked about a lot of different things, what's one action item that leaders, HR people who are listening right now could take to their workplace right now?
We have the opportunity to make real impact in our organization. And that comes with the people that you are working with right away. And when we think about culture, is that shift from enterprise-wide culture, we're nimble, we're agile. We need to shift those words to how we are feeling as a unit and how are we defining health within our team. And then there is a proven way to be able to help execute and measure effectively that will impact the health of your team, make you look amazing for your executives, and ultimately the health of the company as a whole.
My guest today has been Mark Mohammadpour, the founder and CEO of Chasing the Sun. Mark, been a pleasure to have you on. Appreciate you coming back.
Thank you, Brandon.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Zenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Zenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.